Hey guys, it's Liv here, and in today's video, I'm going to be ranking every single grass-type Pokemon in competitive. If you guys enjoy these type of tier lists and you want to see more like it, leave a like in the video and subscribe for more content. With that said though, of course, comment down below as well what types you want to see. Whether it's just different types of Pokemon, like maybe you want to see fairy types, or maybe you want to see bug types, or really whatever other type you want to see for the tier list, or even just a not type tier list if you want to see that too. Maybe you want to see abilities ranked. Whatever it is, comment it down below so I know what to make for the next tier list video. With that said though, as well, if you want to go the extra mile, there's links down below for things such as the Twitter and Discord where you can stay up to date on videos, or if you want to become a channel member, there's a bunch of different perks you get with that. All of those will be linked in the description, and as well as this tier list if you want to make your own. So with that said, let's get into how we're going to be doing the tier list today. For anyone who doesn't know, we tier typically off of a combination of Smogon and VGC. I feel like this is the best way for anyone who finds this video so they're not let down, whether they're looking for a tier list on VGC Pokemon or they're looking for a tier list on Smogon Pokemon. I have you covered in some way, shape, or form here. With that said, our S pluses are for Pokemon that are pretty top tier. These are like the top 5-10 Pokemon in the Natdex Ubers, Natdex AG, the Sword and Shield Ubers, Sword and Shield AG, or the VGC formats. Specifically because these are the highest formats basically for Sword and Shield, Natdex, and for VGC that we have for any real Pokemon here. So that way then I can make sure that I'm accounting for basically the most allow all format possible, and these are the Pokemon that still manage to be the best of the best in those. The S tier categories are Pokemon that are pretty decent as far as an Uber's VGC setting goes. This would probably be something, for example, like a Tapu Fini, where while it's not a top 5 Pokemon on VGC, it is still a pretty decent Pokemon. Or maybe you're thinking of an Uber like maybe a Reshiram or a Zekrom. These are still pretty decent Pokemon in Ubers, they're just not running the metagame. Or maybe even this is some really top tier OU Pokemon that just controls the metagame so much that it has to be put here like a Landorus Therian. The A tiers for decent Pokemon in the OU setting, or they're pretty okay Pokemon in VGC. They're not always consistently top tier, but they're decently good. And also for some really egregiously bad Ubers, we do actually have one that will probably be making that today, as much of a hot take as I know it'll be, but it will again all be mentioned in the A tier section. The B tier section is for Pokemon that are pretty decent top tier UU Pokemon. They might be really niche VGC Pokemon, or they're Pokemon in OU that are existing, they're not dominant, they're just fine. The C tier category is going to be for Pokemon that are like niche UU, pretty good in RU. It will start to fall out of the VGC realm here just because a lot of VGC Pokemon don't really fall this low that are that noteworthy to mention, and also because there's no lower tier for VGC. D tier is going to be for Pokemon that are like the NUPU range, maybe a really terrible RU Pokemon. Again, line's a little blurry for D tier, I'll be honest. It's just, you'll kind of know these Pokemon when you see them. The F tier is for Pokemon that are either fully evolved and have to be mentioned because they're fully evolved, or they're for NFEs that are so noteworthy that I figured they had to be mentioned that don't fall into our S plus through D tier. So first up though, let's start off with the Venusaur. So Venusaur was an S tier on our poison, and I'm actually going to put all the Venusaurs in the same place that I put them because I still actually believe in their rankings. Gmax Venusaur is easily one of the best Gmax Pokemon we've had to date in my personal opinion. And it's honestly really amazing with Vine Lash. It still gets max ooze to boost its damage output, which is also pretty incredible. And it's also able to take advantage of the sun in VGC, which is amazing for it in my opinion. The Venusaur as well, even in base, is still an incredible Pokemon. It's not one of those Pokemon like Zard that has to Dynamax to be good, it just always is good. And Mega Venusaur I'm going to put in the B tier. Again, Mega Venusaur is a pretty decent Pokemon, and I still stand by its original tiering that I put it in for the grass tier list. This is the Pokemon that, while it's no longer the best Venusaur form, because it's probably Gmax Venusaur, it's still a really incredible mon as far as a Natdex setting goes. You can use it to sponge a lot of different hits. It's a great water check, and it's also a pretty decent check to just anything that's not a super effective hit. Big Fat is an amazing defensibility on this Pokemon, able to make it take hits from fire and ice types a little bit easier. So I gotta give it to Mega Venusaur. Still a great Pokemon, just sadly power creep of general Venusaur sun buffs as well as Gmax Venusaur existing have sadly pushed it a little bit to the curve as far as Venusaurs go. Next up we do Vileplume. Vileplume I'm going to put in the D tier. I think this is a pretty good low tier sponge. It's really good for switching in on any sort of specially offensive Pokemon, and with the addition of stuff like Strength Sap in recent generations, this has actually become a pretty decent NUPU sort of mon. Vileplume as well, having a nice poison immunity for Toxic Spikes as well as general Toxic, do make this a bit of a more defensive behemoth in the lower tiers, especially when taking on water types that might be running the combination of like Scald and Toxic, since Scald won't really do a lot of damage to this and it has an immunity to Toxic. Easy D tier Pokemon in my opinion. Next up we have Parasect. This mon is garbage. absolute F tier. I'll be honest. I couldn't really tell you something that Parasect does right. I will say, I could have sworn, and I might actually be misremembering here, I think Parasect was run like 1 point in maybe 27 VGC with like Wide Guard plus Dry Skin. If I remember correctly, I'd actually have to double check that. Yeah, Wide Guard and Dry Skin combination. I couldn't even tell you the team, but I've definitely found it in VGC at least. But it's like niche among niche. And this is like a 17 format where it's literally regional decks only. It's the only reason it was even like used. And I used that again in the loosest context possible. I just remember it from when I actually used to do IRL events in VGC. Terrible Pokemon still. This is literally, there are a million better grass types in my personal opinion. F tier. Victreebel. Victreebel honestly probably would have been ranked higher in my personal opinion if it wasn't for the buffs that Venusaur got. Victreebel now sadly is not the chlorophyll poison type that has, oh, the chlorophyll grass poison that has Weather Ball. That's Venusaur as well now. On top of this as well, Venusaur now has coverage to better hit steals outside of Sun. Victreebel only has Weather Ball. Victreebel does have one thing over Venusaur though, that it does have priority. Sucker Punch is pretty decent on this, and it could actually take advantage of Sword Dance sets. This is 105 attack and 100 special attack. It's still a decent Sun Sweeper, but it no longer has the niche over Venusaur of being a Weather Ball Grass Poison Sweeper. So it definitely did go down a bit in terms of general usefulness, but it's still a pretty cool Pokemon. I'm going to give this a D tier. I'm actually going to put it right behind Vileplume for now. This might change as the tier list goes on, but for now, I do stand by that rating, generally speaking. Next up, we do have Hisuian Electrode. So I do have to pull up the Hisuian Electrode's moveset, because I'll be honest, I don't actually remember what this thing gets. I do know that this has basically no moves, but I could not tell you what specifically the moves are that it gets. Like, I know it gets Chloroblast, which is signature. It does get Energy Ball. I thought it got Leaf Storm too, but it does not, it seems like, which is pretty terrible. To be fair, Chloroblast, we don't know what its non-PLA effect will be, but still not exactly a guaranteed good move. Maybe it ends up being like Hyper Beam, and that would be kind of shit. Regardless though, still not terrible. As far as an offensive move goes, that's 145, and this could just be like a nuke. Thunderbolt at the very least is good, but it has no Volt Switch, which is pretty terrible. The typing is really cool though, I will say, and 80 special attack on top of the 150 speed, you could probably just get away with running Modest in most games. I won't act like this is terrible. I actually think there are some situations where I could see this mon being used in a low tier setting, but oh my god, this needs a better move pool to do so. Maybe something like even just, honestly, just give it Electrode's moveset. If you give it Electrode's moveset plus the 2 grass moves, that would probably be enough. Because regular Electrode does still get other moves, I should say. Like, for example, it gets stuff like Volt Switch, it gets stuff like Toxic, Sucker Punch, Explosion. I think this actually gets Explosion too no, it doesn't even get Explosion, it gets Self-Destruct. I think that right now, what I will say is a lot of the moves that it doesn't get, not all of them, but a lot of them, I think will just be egg moves. So that does help alleviate some of it. I am going to put it in D tier. I think it has potential. I don't think it's as badly shafted as Parasect was, at the very least, because Parasect has a terrible speed stat, it has a bunch of overtimes weaknesses. Electrode, at least, I think if nothing else, could be a really cool Spexmon, in all honesty, with like Thunderbolt plus Chloroblast, or even just Energy Ball, let's say if Chloroblast gets cut, and then those throw on like Self-Destruct there too, or even just like run a Life Orb. It could be kind of cool. I'm gonna, no matter what else comes up, unless if, in fact, yeah, no matter what comes up, this will just stay at the bottom of D tier just because of uncertainty. It's not something like an Ursaluna where we could say confidently that it will have a pretty decent moveset because it evolves from Ursaring. This is way too much ambiguity, and its stats are already kind of unimpressive besides the speed. I can't really faithfully put this above something like a Victreebel or a Vileplume. They'd at least have sets they can like definitively make work. This barely has 4 moves it would justify running, and the 4 moves would literally be Thunder Wave, Energy Ball, Thunderbolt, and Self-Destruct. You could maybe throw Chloroblast up over something, so yeah, 5 moves literally at best. D tier Pokemon. Next up is Executor. Executor, I can't lie, is a Pokemon that I've definitely gotten a bit higher on as far as as far as the generations go, I should say. Both are pretty decent Trick Room mons as far as singles goes, but obviously, you know, Alolan is the better Trick Room option there. As far as these mons go, I don't actually think they're too separate, but what I will say, I'm going to put regular Executor in the F tier, and this is more so just because of the fact that I think Alolan Executor's typing of Grass Dragon, despite missing out on Chlorophyll, Executor doesn't really have a high enough speed stat to take advantage of Chlorophyll in my opinion. 55 is pretty terrible. Even something like a Victory Bell has better options. I will give it though that its moveset is pretty decent as far as the physical options go, especially it's really just stab and ancient power, which is kind of unfortunate, but physically it has some good options like Zen Headbutt, Low Kick, it has stuff like Seed Bomb, you get Explosion, which is kind of cool, like you get some pretty decent stuff, even like Tantrum for a more reliable steel option, but I can't actually really see a world where this wouldn't be running mixed in all honesty, because it doesn't get stuff like Weather Ball, which is pretty unfortunate, so this is just walled by steals indefinitely. So I definitely got to give regular Executor the F tier for this one. However, I will say though that a Alolan Executor on the other hand does actually get a solid D tier. I'm actually going to put this right below Vileplume for now. I could maybe see these two swapping in all honesty. I personally rate Vileplume a little bit higher actually. Mostly just because of the fact that Vileplume is actually also in tandem with its good singles metas, had some good doubles. In fact, I know I said I was going to keep Vileplume in D. I'm actually going to put it in low C for now. I do think there's enough discrepancy actually to where I want to put Vileplume higher. I think I might have actually put Vileplume in D on the poisons list, but for what it's worth, I think that could have maybe also been C. I think it ended top of D, if I remember. It doesn't really matter. I think that Vileplume is probably a C Pokemon on the grass list in all honesty. And comparing it to Alolan Executor, I think there's enough of a jump to where, while I could maybe see if there's some stuff that bridges between Eggy and Vileplume maybe going down a bit more, but right now I think the line is way too big. And Executor is still a pretty good Trick Room option. It's a really good breaker. I just think that Vileplume has a lot more variety it can offer to teams, whether it's stuff, as I said, like Torkoal plus Vileplume in VGC. It's really good in NU as a Spinef grass type. It has a really good poison immunity. It's not even like a terrible low tier option on Suns, I would say personally, but it's a little bit on the slower end for what it's worth. The point being is that I do think there's enough of a jump between Vileplume and Alolan and Eggy to where I do want to separate it, but this might change as the tier list goes on. I'm still indifferent on my placement. Tangela up next though. Tangela is a pretty cool option. As far as a low tier grass goes, Tangela has fallen off a little bit, but it's still a decent Violet option. This still gets some good support moves like Knock and Leech that are pretty useful, and it gets the Spinef boost that Tangrowth gets without having to run an Assault Vest. I'm gonna give this a D tier. I know it's not currently tiered anymore. It used to be tiered pretty commonly. I think it will definitely pop up as next generation goes, and even still, among non-tiered Pokemon, I think this is still better than a lot of them for what it brings to the table. Easy D tier. Meganium's up next. Oh god, Meganium. Why do I have to tier Meganium? I love this mon so much, but it's so terrible. Meganium has a huge issue with having literally like Venusaur level stats. In fact, I think they're actually the same stats as Venusaur, if I remember correctly. No, they're same numbers, but just flipped around for the special attack and the physical defense. It's literally the only change here. So Meganium just kind of has two offenses, it doesn't really know what to do with. Its support moves aren't terrible, but the issue is this mon has like no moveset that's actually like viable, because you're kind of having to run a mixed moveset on this, because all its coverage is on the physical side. And if you're gonna run any sort of physical grass moves, it's like Petal Blizzard or Seed Bomb, both of which are pretty not great options. And you're missing out on stuff like Giga Train, which is pretty useful in general. So I don't know. I think that Meganium is definitely an F tier grass. At least Eggy, I think, is a valuable stab, and it has a presence in Trick Room, which I think is pretty cool. I can't really give that to Meganium. And at the very least, though, it does have better options for support than something like Parasect. And if nothing else, I think that at least this kind of has a niche low tier presence. But again, they're both so bad, I don't think it matters. Blossom. Blossom actually is not terrible. I'm going to put this right above Eggy. If nothing else, Blossom does have a couple of things going for it. For one, this does have Strength Tap plus Quiver, which is kind of cool. It has some cool support moves for VGC. Chlorophyll is pretty good. It's, in my opinion, as far as like a doubles perspective goes, it's just a worse version of Vileplume personally, because Vileplume also is a Fairy Killer, which is pretty nice for it. Blossom technically can still run something like a Sludge Bomb, but it's missing out on the stab for it, and I don't think the ground resistance really matters a lot at that point. It does have a little bit better Fizz Def than Vileplume, to be fair, which is actually kind of cool. If nothing else, that does give it a very slight edge, but Vileplume just hitting harder, and they're both, again, the same speed. Unless if you really were relying on the Quiver Dance, it doesn't really matter. And again, I think that Vileplume does have a little bit more benefit in terms of what it would offer to a doubles team. But they're both kind of niche enough in doubles. I think that Vileplume, though, is literally just better Blossom, and I think in every single way. So Blossom we're going to give F tier, but I think it will probably end up being the best F tier that we get. Next up though is Jumpluff. Jumpluff's a pretty cool Pokemon actually. I was looking at this one for the abilities video when Mia had put giving Jumpluff Prankster as an option, and this gets some pretty cool support moves actually. It gets a lot of really good support moves. I don't think it's a great Pokemon still. Jumpluff sadly is a little bit too not good, to say it nicely, to really be a viable low tier Mon. But it has some cool stuff like SD Acro is kind of cool on this. It's fast enough to take advantage of it, and it has some good stuff like Strength Sap. It's got some cool support moves like Leech Seed, Memento, Encore. I don't think it's terrible, at least compared to these, but it's definitely below like an Executor level. I think if nothing else, a couple of things this does have actually. One, it has Momentum, which I'll put it over Meganium for that alone in all honesty. But it also has it has more valuable support moves to a lower tier setting in my opinion, because typically you don't really care about a lot of screens in low tier, but I think stuff like Leech Seed, Stun Spore, which I think Meganium actually for what it's worth does get Stun Spore, but as far as the status moves go, it actually doesn't get Stun Spore. The speed control is definitely appreciated on Jumpluff then. It still also gets stuff like, no, it doesn't get Tailwind. I thought it got Tailwind. Even still, honestly, stuff like Encore though, Memento are both pretty good options. I think that the U-turn option as well, again, just bringing in other Pokemon after you've popped off stuff like U-turn is a little more valuable, and it still does get at least one screen. Meganium having two is a little bit nicer in that regard, to be fair, but it doesn't really matter because, again, screens aren't really your type of support in low tier. So I'm going to give Jumpluff literally a space above Meganium. Sunflora. This is going to be the lowest ranked Pokemon on the list today, guys. Sunflora is a terrible grass type. I'll spoil it right now. Actually, no, there's a couple that I'm seeing already that are going to be lower. Jumpluff, though, its one benefit, I guess, is the fact it has good coverage for Chlorophyllmon. Just having stuff like Earth Power is pretty cool. Sludge Bomb is pretty cool, but oh my god, this is too slow to make it work. Even if you like 4 times the speed on this, terrible speeds out of base 30. It really can't take advantage of it. I guess maybe on like a Trick Room Sun team it could be good, because even still with the double speed, you'll be underpacing a lot of Pokemon actually. To put in perspective, if you were to actually give this thing a 0 stat in its speed, run this with a quiet nature, you're still underpacing most Trick Room Pokemon, even with the Sun. You'd be hitting 118, which basically means I think that you're, I think that like Executor, yeah. So a non-minus speed Executor Alola actually would still be hitting second, to put it in perspective. And while on a Trick Room team, to be fair, you would probably be running a minus speed set on Alola and Executor. It's just a fun anecdote. It doesn't really apply to actually what a Trick Room team would be running most likely, but it's more so to show the point that Sunflora could still unironically be utilized on Trick Room even if the Sun was up, and it would still be a slow Pokemon. F tier, easy F tier. Celebi, really decent grass. This is honestly a really useful grass as far as utility mons go. It's got a cool typing, and then while it has a lot of weaknesses, it does also have some pretty cool stab options in tandem with also some coverage like Earth Power, Dazzling Gleam. It's got some good support moves like Thunder Wave, Heal Belt, Stealth Rocks. Easy B tier in my opinion. I think that Celebi gets a lot of shit, but it's a really useful Pokemon in my personal opinion. This can do a lot of different things for a team, and while it's not great in VGC, it's actually pretty terrible in VGC. I think in singles, this actually could be a mon that's pretty splashable on a lot of different builds. Sceptile's up next. Sceptile's grown on me for sure, actually. I used to think this Pokemon was pretty terrible, and I still don't think it's great. However, I do think this actually has a bit more of a presence than I initially give it credit for. I will say I've actually played this thing even in VGC in a couple of Spike Month games, and it's been kind of cool. But I do think that Sceptile's biggest benefit, though, would honestly come from the fact of stuff like BDSP being a better format for it. It's a pretty cool choice specs user actually in there. In fact, one of my favorite Wi-Fi battles I did all Chen for VGC was with the Spec Sceptile team, and it kind of just kicks teeth in it because of how fast it is for that format. Even still, it's not a horrible Pokemon in singles, but it's not great by any means. I am going to give this a D tier, and I'm going to probably actually put this at the top of D tier, and I think I'm actually going to bring Vileplume down. Sceptile, in my opinion, is a pretty good bridge between these two Pokemon, because where I think that Vileplume has a couple of formats it's good for in Sword and Shield, and where it would be a really good option in those, I think that Sceptile's good formats are BDSP and Sword and Shield for both singles, whereas for Vileplumes, it would be Sword and Shield for both. The point being is I think that Sceptile is a good indication of a bridge between Alola and Aggie's viability and Vileplume's viability. So I'm going to bring Vileplume back to D tier. Mega Sceptile, though, gets a C tier. It's just faster Sceptile with an actual secondary stab that's really good. Sadly, they didn't give this thing Draco, which is unfortunate. And I do think that, to be fair, Sceptile's offenses should be flipped. If this is a physical attacker, this would be an easy A tier Pokemon. Because stuff like, for example, you would have Sword Dance variations with Leaf Blade, Low Kick, Outrage, Rock Slide, so many good physical options in this Pokemon. It really was a huge nerf, though to be fair I can get because previously in Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, special moves were all of what grass was, so I can kind of get the logic, but oh my god, I really wish it was a physical attacker. C tier still. It's still a really good fast Pokemon. Nice immunity with Lightning Rod too that boosts the special attack. It's a good way to actually boost the special attack stat on this Pokemon, which is pretty useful because again, its stats mostly lie in the special side. But nice C tier grass. Fluticolo, I'm going to give Fluticolo also a C tier option. Fluticolo does actually have a lot going for it in my personal opinion. While in singles, this is a pretty terrible Pokemon as far as, actually, no, Ludicolo has actually fallen off a bit. Ludicolo is no longer like the grass that's utilized on Rain really heavily to check Kyogre. Honestly, yeah, no, Ludicolo has fallen off a lot. It's just not needed anymore. I was kind of thinking back to like, you know, in doubles teams when this was a really good Kyogre check where you would, and you could still use it for that, just there's a lot of other options that are more viable right now. I don't know. I'm definitely going to give this like, I think I'm going to give it between Tangela and Victory Bell. It's still a cool rain option in all honesty. Being a water grass type, this does benefit from rain while also resisting a lot of rain options. Its speed here at 70 is pretty good. I just think that sadly, it's no longer the Pokemon it used to be. You're no longer using this as a fake out option on rain for opposing teams in VGC. You're no longer using this thing as a really good offensive rain option because there's just a lot of better rain sweepers this gen for VGC. And in singles, it's just never really been a great Pokemon. It's always been a kind of mediocre mon. So I'm going to give it D tier, but I do think that, to be fair, Ludicolo has a potential to be viable. It's just not currently. Next up, though, we do have Shiftry. Shiftry isn't actually, like, really not a great Pokemon. But what I will say, though, is that Shiftry's typing is pretty decent offensively, and it does have priority that is stab on it, which at least gives it some sort of viability outside of Sun. More so than Victory Bell, at least. I'm actually going to put it in the D tier, again, right above Victory Bell. The only reason for this is truthfully because of the fact that the Sucker Punch in this is actually stab, and on Victory Bell it isn't. Also, it's a slightly faster Pokemon. So, easy D tier. Breloom, I can't lie. Breloom was a Pokemon that I used to actually really think wasn't that great, in my personal opinion. But I think that Breloom has honestly become a Pokemon that has become kind of a terrifying mon in singles. And I think especially BDSP this generation really did show me how potent Breloom could actually be. So I'm actually going to give this a solid A tier. Breloom has really shown this generation that it is an actual force to be reckoned with. It's a really solid subtoxic mon, considering it does have poison heal as well to benefit from that. It's a cool speed tier, and on the flip side as well, you could run stuff like Technician Band sets with Bullet Seed and Mach Punch that are absolutely monstrous. So I'm definitely going to give this thing a solid A tier. Okay, so now we're going to get into our second NFE Pokemon today, actually, and this one I think is actually pretty decent. I know that Roselia has fallen off as the generations have happened, but I think it's honestly still an amazing NFE Pokemon. It's a Grass Poison yet again, which a lot of grass types seem to share this type combination for some reason, but it also has stuff like Dual Spikes. It's an amazing Spit-F wall, especially with a Violet, and it's also a decent offensive Pokemon as well, for the low tier setting, that is. I gotta give Roselia a solid D tier, and I'm actually gonna put it right above Shiftry. I think there's a case to maybe put it above Eggy too, but I do feel a little bit cautious of doing that, considering the fact that at the very least Roselia is not tiered at all right now. And while I do acknowledge that Roselia still has viability outside of just being a not tiered Pokemon, and it's probably one of the most viable not tiered Pokemon we have on our list today, I still do think that at the very least Eggy being banned from a tier does speak a bit above where Roselia is just not even used enough to be tiered. So I do want to acknowledge that. I know that, again, to be fair, you could make the case that Roselia and what it offers to teams is a lot more splashable than Eggy's, but I think that when you're getting banned from a tier that Roselia isn't even viable enough to be used in, I think that that's a conversation where usage could start having merit. So for anyone who might be annoyed by that, so be it. I personally think it's pretty fair logic. Roselia is still an amazing Pokemon though. Again, amazing dual spiker, great recovery, natural cure is an amazing ability on it, but I do think that when it's not even being used enough to be in a tier that Eggy was good enough to be banned in, it does say a bit about Roselia's potential to be viable in this current generation. I just think there's a lot of mons that just fell in terms of tiering viability to where it is a little harder to justify Roselia in a PU setting, especially when we look at a lot of the grasses that are down there. Stuff like Eldegoss is a great spinner, and Boots as well just are so nice this gen. Ferroseed's down there is just a better Violet Spikemon, and I forgot to put a Ferroseed on the tier list. I'll mention right now, Ferroseed, we'll put it right above Vileplume in the tier list, and I'll try and edit it in at the very end of the video, so it will be on the very end of the tier list, but I forgot to put Parasect on my tier list. God damn it. Even still though, I do think that regardless, there's still a lot of competition grass-wise. Even outside of those, we have stuff like Whimsicott and PU. So while Roselia could have merit, I think Ferroseed's presence alone, truthfully, just stops Roselia from being used because it's just a better version of Roselia. Regardless though, still a cool D-tier Pokemon, but we have Cacturne up next. I can't lie, I really like Cacturne a lot, but it's still terrible, even if Amel bullied the shit out of me with it in early BSP. I will give it above Jumpluff at least. I think the spikes in this, as well as the Stab Sucker Punch, is actually pretty decent on Cacturne. You could make Water Absorb pretty cool for like a nice Scald immunity, which on a physical mon is actually kind of nice. I know it's a grass type and it typically resists Scald, but it's a Pokemon that typically is running physical stats with stuff like Sucker Punch, Seed Bomb, Stomping Tantrum, Low Kick. So having a Scald immunity is pretty useful on it. And again, it's a decent spiker. While it is a definite F tier Pokemon, I think it's honestly one of the better ones. I think you could even make a case for this being the best F tier, in all honesty. But I think that Blossom having a nice Quiver Dance Shanktop set is able to honestly get past a lot of like low tier checks to it, and I use that very loosely. And yeah, I think having Trick Room is honestly really cool on it, as well as Harvest for nice sustain. The Cacturne doesn't really typically have that sort of sustain. I think it's an extreme glass cannon, and despite having the priority, it's a low speed Pokemon still. It's not one that's typically a good Trick Room mon because it's not bulky at all. So I am going to put it below those two, but it's still one of the better F tiers, and I will acknowledge that. Next up, we have Dilly. It's a pretty cool water immunity mon. It's a nice stealth rocker too. As far as low tier setting goes, this is a pretty decent mon in most generations, albeit again, not really great right now. I'm gonna put it right below Cacturne, in all honesty. It's a cool rocker, nice Scald immunity, which is pretty good because this is a grass that's neutral to water. But I still don't think it's that great. It's nice because of just how unique it is for the grass typing, and that's really what I'll give it. Tropius again, not a great grass type. We're in that very like F tier set of grass types. One thing I will say is that Tropius does have a lot of good sun abilities, stuff like Chlorophyll, Solar Power, and Harvest, all three great abilities. Sadly though, all of its stats suck. Its best stat is 99 HP, and then everything else is below 90. Both offenses are 68 attack and 72 special attack. Speed's 51, so it can't even really take advantage of Chlorophyll, though albeit it's better able to do so than Blossom and Vileplume, but they have at least good offensive stats. Tropius also really only has Swords Dance to boost its attack, and its coverage is okay, to be fair. It has stuff like Dragon Hammer, Acrobatic, no, it doesn't even have Acrobatics. Oh my god, its best flying move is Aerial Ace. Has Seed Bomb and Leaf Blade for physical grass. Earthquake's pretty good. I'm still gonna give it F tier though, but I'm gonna put it above Jumpluff at least, because I think if nothing else, that this is a lot better abilities than Jumpluff has, considering Jumpluff's abilities are Chlorophyll, Leaf Guard, and Infiltrator. Tropius having stuff like Solar Power as well to maybe take advantage of the fact that it has a terrible special attack stat is pretty useful. And on top of it as well, this at least has a good mixed opportunity to run on this Pokemon. It has at least physical setup, which is pretty good. It has it's about as good utility wise, but in very different ways, mind you. I think they're pretty comparable and they're pretty interchangeable. As far as low tier grasses go, I slightly lean more Tropius. Grottle's up next. This is a pretty decent violet grass. I'm going to put it right below Cacturne. If nothing else, I think it's a lot better as far as the bulkier grasses go than something like Tropius, Dilly, Meganium, etc. Grottle having an actual resistance to ground is pretty valuable. This has some pretty good coverage options too, with stuff like Earth Power. Sadly, it does miss out on Earthquake, which is actually kind of a big detriment. But at the same time, when you're comparing 89 versus 55, neither offense is great. Even still, it does have some good coverage. For example, you get stuff like Superpower, so it still can manage to hit stuff like Steals that it otherwise would be resistant to. So I'll give it that. Leech Seed is pretty cool support. It's a nice stealth rocker as far as grass goes, and it's, unlike Cradilly, one that actually does resist grass without having to force its ability. So that's definitely something, since you can then utilize stuff like Shell Armor Curse sets, which are pretty good. It's a cool low tier grass in my opinion. Definitely one of the better Violet grasses personally. So I'm gonna give it an F tier, but it's not bad. Torterra, I'm gonna actually give Torterra a D tier, and this might be a bit of a hot take, but I'm gonna put it above. I'm gonna put it above Electrode, below Tangela. No, I'm gonna put it above Tangela. Actually, I'm actually gonna put it above Shiftry. Final answer. I think that one thing that Torterra does actually get this generation is the fact that it's a pretty decent BDSP mon. BDSP lost a lot of good hidden power users, which actually helps Torterra a lot. As far as actual BDSP tiering goes, this ends up actually slotting in the RU range because there's not a lot of mons that viably cover this, which, to put it in perspective, while I know that sounds low because BDSP has it's a really shallow generation this time around, this is still in the same tier as mons like Gyarados, which are pretty decent. Same as Nidoqueen, which are Pokemon that, when you think of competitive mons, these are decent, viable Pokemon. So I know that, again, the final tiering means nothing. The Pokemon can still be a shit Pokemon and used really highly. Just ask Ambipom, or Miss Magus is a UU Pokemon in BDSP. So again, that's not everything, and I will acknowledge that. However, at the same time though, I do think that Torterra does offer a lot, even in UU and OU realms. It's a grass ground type in a generation with no hidden power, so having ice moves that are 4 times effective on it is a lot less common. It's a pretty decent physical grass type as far as both offensively and being a nice physical wall. It's a great stealth rocker for grass types. It has some decent special bulk too, which, especially in a no hidden power gen, is pretty valuable for it. It's got some good recovery, which is pretty nice. It has some good support moves, stuff like Leech Seed. You get dual screens, you get stealth rocks. It's a good setup mon too. This is like a low tier dual dance. It's kind of like a low tier Landorus in BDSP, in all honesty, for the potential to be a nice dual dance rock polish mon with stabs, with sword dance as well. I won't act like this is some messiah or anything of low tier, but I think it has enough going for it, both offensively and defensively speaking, to where I could actually see this as a pretty viable Pokemon. So I'm going to definitely give this a solid D tier. I think it's a strong D tier in all honesty. Rosarade's up next. Easy A tier, but I think that Roserade, I will acknowledge as well, has definitely fallen off. Actually, no, that's a lie. I'm going to put it in B tier. I'm going to put it below Megafinu. I think that one thing I will say is, while this is a really good mon as far as BDSP goes, Rosarade's usage in general has also fallen off a bit in BDSP. It's like a kind of cusp UU OU mon, and it's still not bad. I just think that in tandem with its really not great Sword and Shield usage gen, I can't really justify it in A tier, even if it is a pretty viable OU mon in BDSP. It's a nice dual spiker though. It's got some good recovery. Technician's pretty valuable on it, even with the loss of hidden power. It can, well, actually, no, Technician's terrible on it now. What am I saying? Natural Cure is still a pretty good ability on it though, in all honesty. I do think that Roserade is still a pretty good offensive mon. You can definitely run some like Life Orb spike sets or like Synthesis Black Sludge bulkier variants and make this work really well, but it's not the Pokemon it used to be. I think the Technician hidden power was a huge thing that could help against a lot of different Roserade checks that it's now definitely walled by, sadly, for stuff like Ferrothorn and Sword and Shield. So sadly, I am going to rate Roserade in the B tier. I think if it still had hidden power, this would be an A tier Pokemon, like a low end A tier Pokemon, just because I think it would be a lot more viable as far as Sword and Shield goes. And BDSP too, actually. I think it would be able to take advantage of stuff like hidden power Ice to hit Garchomp and Salamence a bit better than just going for Dazzling Gleam. Same as Dragonite too, which has multi-scale benefiting it a lot. Or even still, you could run a lot of other hidden powers, I'm sure. Just hidden power Ice was the first one that came to mind because I think it would probably be the best one for BDSP OU. Regardless though, easy B tier. Wormadam, this was the Pokemon I was looking at when I said I found something worse than Sunflora. It's a combination of being as slow and shitty as Sunflora with as little coverage as possible, and it's as shitty typing as a Parasect is. This is just the worst grass type that we're gonna tier today. I cannot really think of a mon that actually could be worse than this, in all honesty, even just for fully evolved Pokemon, let alone for grasses. The grass bug typing is a terrible typing on any Pokemon. It's so bad that I'm going to be covering it with my face cam because it doesn't even deserve to be seen today. F tier Pokemon. In fact, I think that there's a case to be making an F- for Wormadam, but I won't be that mean to it just yet until we see the rest of the tier list. Next up is Cherrim. Cherrim, actually, I will give a D tier, and it's solely off the fact that Flower Gift is actually a pretty incredible ability, as niche as it is. Cherrim does have that one thing going for it, which is actually pretty useful in my personal opinion. So with the Flower Gift being a thing, hold on. Cherim. Okay, no, Cherubi was the one that had Glorp. I was gonna say, did they change Cherim's ability in like BDSP or something? But no. Flower Gift is still a pretty cool ability, boosting the attack and SPDF of the partner Pokemon next to it. It's only useful in VGC, but Cherim does still get some good support moves with this. Stuff like Healing Wish, for example. You get stuff like Helping Hand. You get Heal Pulse. So it has some nice utility to actually benefit this. And I think that's the only reason I'm actually gonna put it in D tier. I did make the rule that I had to put anything in D tier above Electrode because of non-performance, and the fact that its move pool is way too much of a gamble to actually give any clear judgment on it, because it could be a mon that could fall into F tier in all honesty. But Cherim is definitely, while the lowest mon in D tier, I think it has enough support moves going where this is actually a kind of viable mon. It's at least more viable than a lot of the F tiers go. And it's also such a unique mon too. There's no other mon that performs like Cherim does, even if it's not a standout mon. So D tier. Carnivine's up next. Levitate Grass, kind of useless in terms of what it actually benefits. It's not like a Storm Drain, where at the very least it's a physical mon that's immune to Scald. One thing I will say though is that Carnivine's stats are also pretty terrible. 100 attack is its best stat, but it has like Crunch and Seed Bomb and Power Whip as its only actual physical moves. It's a pretty obnoxiously terrible Pokemon, but at the same time, at least it gets some okay support options. I'm going to put it below Meganium for sure. It's at least not 4 times weak like Parasect is, and it at least has an immunity, which is better than something like a Warmadam has or like a Sunflora has. So we'll give it F tier, but it's definitely lower on the end for sure. Next up, we do have, let's see, we have Abomasnow next. Abomasnow is actually a pretty cool option. This is a really cool Veil Pokemon. It has a lot going for it as far as the typing goes offensively. Ice is pretty decent for a lot of common weaknesses. Stuff like, for example, your flying types that would typically harm grasses, you can offensively handle those now. Opposing grasses that you wouldn't really hit super effectively, you can hit them super effectively now. So I'm going to give Abomasnow a pretty nice tiering off that alone. Also, Aurora Veil is pretty good. This has some good offensive stats. It's nice mixed as well. So I'm going to give this thing a solid D tier. I think I'm going to put it right above Aggie. And I think the reason being is truthfully Veil. I think you could actually make a case. I'm actually going to put it above Sceptile. I think above Sceptile is pretty fair. Because if nothing else, this has some nice priority options to it to take advantage of the low speed. The typing is pretty lackluster defensively speaking, but it's so offensively potent actually, and switching into Abomasnow is kind of a nightmare in my personal opinion. I'm going to put a Mega Abomasnow literally right above it, because I think this is a lot better of an offensive Pokemon. However, on the flip side, Mega Abomasnow can't hold items, which mostly comes into account when you're accounting for Scarf to get Veil off easier, or just to damage things with a faster speed tier, and for Life Orb just to boost damage output. Though the higher offenses do make up for the second one. Light Clay is also kind of another thing as far as Veil goes at least, but Abomasnow doesn't really care about the Veil turns as much as something like an A9 does. It's meant to be a fast support Pokemon. This is just a Pokemon that can pop a Veil to take hits slightly better as far as low tier goes. So Mega Abomasnow, I'm going to put right above it. They're pretty interchangeable in my personal opinion, but I think that Mega Abomasnow having a higher attack stat and a lower speed stat too does benefit it in a couple ways, such as maybe on a Trick Room team. It's a little more valuable than regular Abomasnow is in that, and that's something more than I get to say for regular. So they're both pretty much D tier Pokemon in all honesty though. Next up we have Leafeon. Leafeon's a mon that's pretty terrible in all honesty. Leafeon has a pretty obnoxiously horrible move pool. It's a pretty okay physical defensive grass type though, and I think if nothing else, having just in general the nice Phys Def as well as stuff like Wish support is pretty cool, and it's unique among grasses if nothing else. I still think it in general has a huge moveslot issue, and realistically you can't even actually run this thing physically because it has literally Bug, Grass, Steel as its coverage, which is not great, but it's better than Carnivine, I guess, because at the very least as far as niche moves go, you have stuff like Aerial Ace as well, which is kind of okay, but not really needed. You don't even get something like a Weather Ball in this, which is very missed opportunity because it could have given this thing a solid special premise, I guess. I don't know. I'm trying to think of... Oh, you know what? I was looking at BDSP. Maybe Sword and Shield just is a bit better. Maybe I was looking at its move pool. Yeah, okay. So I thought it got Knockoff. Okay, so that's actually pretty decent. Knockoff is really nice, this Pokemon, if nothing else. And it does get Weather Ball. Okay, so I wasn't crazy. I was just looking at BDSP, which is terrible for movesets. Carnivine, to be fair, still isn't a Pokemon that's legal, so its BDSP moveset will apply, even if it does get some better coverage outside of that, because it's not really a good Pokemon in Natdex in any fashion, and it's really only usable in BDSP. So I'm going to still apply my Carnivine rating, though actually I will put it above Meganium because the moveset's a lot better, if nothing else. Not above Jumpluff though. I think a Jumpluff at least does have its own kind of unique niche. And if nothing else, again, doesn't really change any of my other ratings for Pokemon, in all honesty. But for Leafeon though, I am still gonna put it in the F tier, but I'll put it above Tropius. I think for a couple of reasons. One, I like the knockoff support a lot on this Pokemon, and also having a much faster speed tier. This does have a couple niche things, such as being the fastest weather sweeper that I can actually think of. Besides Barraskewda, it's the only one that's faster. For faster Pokemon than Leafeon, as far as Chlorophyllmons go, you get Whimsicott, which is really Whimsicott and Jumpluff. And the point being is there are a couple faster ones, but there's nothing faster that actually wants to run Chlorophyll. So this actually is a kind of unique thing to Leafeon, and it's a cool Dynamax Pokemon too. I know in VGC there have been like occasional teams that have run Dynamax Leafeon, but I'm sure they're more like meant to be specifically kind of memey teams. The point being is it is kind of a cool Dynamax Sunsweeper, but it's so fucking niche. Definite F tier, but it's not terrible for F tiers. Rotom-Mow gets a C tier. Rotom-Mow bias aside, I really do hate this Pokemon, but it's honestly really good offensive typing, really good nasty plot Pokemon, great Trick Scarf user. It's just a terrible grass type. I think this is literally a terrible grass type, but it's a good Pokemon. It's a great Pokemon, but if you're using this as your grass type, you're missing out on a lot of things. For example, typically grass types like to be able to switch on water types and be a team's water type check. You're typically not doubling up on grasses on most teams. You're typically not doubling up on electrics on most teams. So you basically only go into a game with one strong water type check unless you're running a water immunity, which does shoot yourself in the foot a bit depending on team comp. I think as well, Rotom-Mow does hurt a lot from metas that allow Zygarde, for example, because you're now going to be your whole team basically is going to end up most likely being neutral to Thousand Arrows, which is a pretty big detriment. Having no Zygarde switching is pretty bad unless you're throwing on something like a Milotic, for example. You're typically going to get shafted by a Banded Zygarde, which is typically allowed in a lot of the lower tiers that Rotom-Mow would thrive in. So we're going to Rotom-Mow C tier, albeit I think it's a good Pokemon, just, oh my god, I really just hate Rotom-Mow's typing as a premise. Shaman, decent grass type. This is just a better version of Celebi. I think it's a better defensive grass type than Rosary it is. Not as good as Venusaur though. This does have some pretty good coverage options, albeit as far as BTSP goes, if I remember correctly, this did lose out on something coverage-wise. Yeah, this also had an Earth Power, which is a pretty big hit. But even still, Gleam is still pretty nice. It's just now that you're walled by Steel types. Leech Seed support can still kind of help with that, especially in tandem with Synthesis. There's not a lot of steals anyway that this would actually want to stay in on as far as BDSP viable ones. It's really just Heatran that it kind of misses out on, and to a degree, Magnezone and Rachi. Though I would argue you could maybe kind of muscle those with Leech at least, if nothing else. Less so Rachi, more so Magnezone. Earth Power is pretty big for Magnezone Tran though, in all honesty. Everything else, it doesn't really matter because it's not going to do anything to Skarmory either way. It's not going to do anything to Scizor either way outside of Leech Seed. Still solid B tier grass though. Shaman Sky, this is an A tier one. I'll be honest, Shaman Sky is fucking terrible. The only reason it's actually allowed, well, the only reason it's banned to Ubers is because of flinch chance. It's the only reason, and it's inconsistent at best. In my personal opinion, Shaman Sky is just a mon that got banned because of hacks, because people don't like playing against Serene Grace teams when they're actually successful. It's not a mon that even keeps up with a lot of fast options in the meta. You would basically need to scarf this to get really good security, because the second you're not flinching something, you're dying. I do think a Shaman Sky basically has a Lecky syndrome where people overrate it because of what it does really well, which Regieleki is great at breaking stuff. Like Regieleki though, where you could just bring a ground type or a mon that's going to take nothing from an electric move, with Shaman Sky, just bring something faster than 127. I do think that while Shaman Sky would be an amazing Pokemon in OU, I don't even think it would actually be a top 5 Pokemon. Might be a really hot take there, I'm sure, and I've gotten a lot of shit for this take before. I'm very well aware it's an unpopular take. I still die in the hill though. I don't think it would be a top 5 OU Pokemon. In BDSP, I think it's good enough to be banned. I don't think there's enough counterplay to it in BDSP, but if we're talking about and this is specifically as far as Natdex OU goes, not Sword and Shield OU, not BDSP OU, Natdex OU. Natdex OU allows a lot of Z-Mons, there are a lot of good weather options, a ton of great priority options, a lot of naturally faster Pokemon that are already top tier, things like Ash Greninja, you have Scarf Kartana, which at the very least this Shaman Sky could Scarf in Air/Flinch, but still naturally faster. Stuff like Weavile with Ice Shard, which is one of the best Pokemon in the format. Stuff like Scizor, which would wall it to all hell and back without HP Fire, and it could just bullet punch it down very quickly. And even still, Scizor can take a lot of hidden power fires pretty easily. You have stuff like Koko that's naturally faster than it. You have a lot of different weather options as well that are fairly viable in this tier. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that this Pokemon could be OU legal. It's just that people don't like the fact that it can uncompetitively drop stuff so heavily with Seed Flare, and that it can flinch stuff with a 60% chance in tandem with that. It's the only reason it's banned. I don't think it's a great Pokemon. Feel free to disagree in the comments. I know that one is going to get a lot of shit. It does every time I bring it up on this channel and in any sort of discussion. I will die in the hill though. A tier Pokemon. Arceus Grass. This is an S+. It's just because it's an Arceus with not horrible typing. It's just not... Well, actually, no. It's an S tier. It's just top of S. It's a great Arceus form. It's a great Arceus form, specifically less so for the metagame because it's pretty terrible in Ubers, but more so for what it does grant Arceus. It's a type that can check a lot of stuff like Kyogre, for example, which is honestly pretty unique. I won't act like this is some really top tier Arceus form as far as BDSP Ubers goes. In fact, I'm actually kind of curious because I haven't actually looked at BDSP Arceus rankings in a while. I know it's not great in Nat Dex. It's actually pretty terrible in Nat Dex. But as far as Arceus Grass goes, I would imagine, yeah, it's not a D tier viable Arceus type, which is, yeah, seeing this, I'm kind of shocked by Psychic, but at the same time, not really. I know this is a huge Deoxys meta as far as OU and as BTSP goes, and I know that stuff like T-Tar is probably going to be a kind of viable mon, which I don't actually see T-Tar on here. That's almost surprising. I feel like I'm missing it, but T-Tar is typically viable. I'm kind of shocked T-Tar's not viable. What the fuck? I'm actually really shocked that T-Tar's not viable. Even still, there's stuff like Darkrai, which is pretty good. Arceus obviously does have Dark types as well. Oh, you know what? Dark type Arceus, that's why T-Tar's not in. Okay, well, even still, outside of that tangent alone, I'm not shocked to see that Arceus Grass has some viability in BDSP Ubers because it is a pretty decent check to Ogre. It's a mon that can actually sponge that. So for that alone, I will give it S tier, and above regular Venusaur at least. But it's no top tier by any means. Servine, I think this is just better Groddle. In fact, I'm actually going to put Servine in the bottom of D. I think that unlike a lot of the other Violet grasses that I will be putting in F tier, Servine has the ability to snowball a team unlike any other low tier grass goes. It's a pretty decent offensive and defensive grass option. It has some good support options as well. If we were to look at Servine's move pool, this gets moves such as Glare, Leech Seed, Knockoff, Synthesis, Defog. So it has some nice support options you can throw at a set that really only needs Leaf Storm offensively speaking. It doesn't really care as far as a low tier setting goes if it misses out on Dragon Pulse. There's not a lot of really good low tier dragons if we're going to look as far as like a PU setting goes for typical PU metas. In fact, I know that we're not tiering off of Gen 7, but just for another metagame that had a pretty wide PU tier, for comparison for what mons typically end up there, there's not a lot of mons here you would really need a dragon move for. It's just stuff like Drampa goes. In fact, it's really just Drampa. That's the only thing you'd actually really want to run Dragon Pulse for. And then maybe a couple other low tier grasses. But even if we compare this, let's say, to current PU, maybe that's changed a little bit. If we compare current dragons in PU, it's Druddigon, which you could potentially just Leech Seed plus Glare through and maybe get around it if you're lucky, though it could always Gunk Shot you, and that's it. That's the only thing. So I don't even think that Dragon Pulse being missing out on this Pokemon is actually a huge deal. Truthfully, Knockoff, Leaf Storm, Synthesis, and Glare would probably be enough for most of the meta. So I do actually think this is a D tier Pokemon. Superior, easy A tier. This is honestly a really great grass type. I know that it's fallen off a bit as far as Nat Dex goes, but it still is a kind of niche Pokemon. You could typically run like Glare, Leech Seed sets with like Leaf Storm and Dragon Pulse or Hidden Power Fire and get a lot of mileage. Contrary is an amazing ability for anti-webs and anti-defog teams. Easy A tier. Simisage, absolutely terrible, but the speed tier is kind of cool, and it has some good coverage options. It's better than Leafeon at the very least, if nothing else. I know a lot of people say these mons are shit, but they have surprisingly good coverage, and its speed is just above 100, which is kind of cool for low tier. Easy F tier, but it's a decent F tier. Actually, I'm putting it above Cacturne. I don't know why, but I'm just gonna die in the hill, I guess. Next up, Leafeon. Cool webs option, that's really all it is. It's just a good low tier webs option, which if nothing else deserves top of F. Low tier webs is pretty cool because a lot of the mons typically don't have great removal options down there, and the ones that do, like have no form of sustain. So having webs is actually kind of cool, especially with a lot of the good offensive threats. If you were to look at a low tier setting, you have stuff like Zard, which is amazing with webs. Especially having that 100 mark would be huge, because not only is it great with webs, but in case your opponent for some reason magic coats or magic bounces it away, you don't have to worry about them with Zard. So there are some options. There's other stuff like Galar Articuno, for example, that could benefit. I won't act like this is some godsend or anything, but low tier webs do kind of have a place, just nowhere near what they used to. Plus Rubombi being down there just definitively outclasses it, and so still F tier, but high enough of a niche. Whimsicott, this is an easy S plus actually. This might be a bit of a hot take, but I think Whimsicott, and I was actually talking about this with a few of my VGC friends earlier, but I think Whimsicott is one of the most pivotal VGC Pokemon we've just ever had. It's an amazing Tailwind option. It has amazing support moves to stuff like Charm, Screens, Memento, Switcheroo, Manual Weather. This has pretty decent typing too of Fairy and Grass. It has a great speed tier, and on top of that as well, this Whimsicott as well gets, I believe it gets Taunt. Yeah, it does get Taunt, which means you can stop other Prankster users that are not Dark type, which is, again, really amazing for it. This is basically the most anti-Prankster Pokemon you get, and on top of that as well, it's still an amazing Prankster option. Great support Pokemon. I know a lot of people say that Grimmsnarl is like the peak of support that we'll ever get. I actually disagree. I think it's Whimsicott. I think Whimsicott is the peak support Pokemon that VGC will ever get. It's by far, in my opinion, the most pivotal, and the only reason that Grimmsnarl is in the conversation, I think, is because it has slightly better versions of speed control. But even still, you get options like Sunspore on this, which aren't terrible, and Tailwind as well, which is also pretty good. Cotton Spore is pretty good. So it actually still has some good speed control options. It's just that Grimmsnarl is typically thought of it because of Thunderwave being more accurate, and Scary Face also just being a thing on it in tandem with Screens, which typically Grim does benefit a bit more from dual screens. Regardless though, I think this is an easy S plus in my opinion. Feel free to again disagree on that. I know that that one might also get a bit of shit. Hisui and Lilligan. This is a pretty cool Pokemon actually, and I think that Lilligan Hisui form actually does have a lot going for it. The grass fighting typing as well as being a physical option is amazing on this. It has some great offensive options like Close Combat, Drain Punch, and Poison Jab, in tandem with Leaf Blade as well. This is basically what regular Lilligan should have been, a Pokemon with actual coverage and a good natural speed tier. This is, in my opinion, going to be a solid high B tier. I think it's going to be one of those like OU BL mons that doesn't quite make OU, but it hits too much and has too of a speed tier to be UU. Maybe depending on power creep, this might be an RU or UU Pokemon, and maybe, well, in Natdex OU probably will be like a UU mon. I think as far as a general like regional meta goes, this is literally going to be like an OU BL mon. Still decent though. I think its typing and speed tier are pretty nice, and with Hustle as well, this will be a great breaker. This could maybe be A tier. I could actually get the argument for A, but I think again it comes down to the fact that I think that these have just better performance, whereas Lilligan is still too much of an oddball, I think, to be reliable, and it has a couple other glaring issues, like it can't really hit flying types for super effective, which would have been kind of cool, especially with a 4x flying weak mon. This even got Rock Slide. I think it could be an easy A tier personally, because it could take advantage of flying types of Chlorophyll, or even if this got like Weather Ball, that could also be kind of cool, because again, at the very least, if nothing else, you could throw this thing on a weather team, and you could run like a mix set, and I know it's only 50, but 50 could be kind of cool depending on counterplay, like Scizor, for example. So we'll give it B tier. Lilligan, regular. This mon's terrible, actually. I'm gonna put it below Cacturne. I think that one thing that regular Lilligan does, actually no, because Lilligan does have one kind of viable core in early VGC with Lilycole. Even still, I'll maybe put it like above Eggy, I guess. This does have some cool support moves like After You, for example, but I think that honestly Vileplume's just a better version of this core in my personal opinion, at least without hidden power goes. With Terrastal, I will say I think this will be the better option, and also the one benefit this does have over Vileplume is the speed tier being better, but that's really the only edge it gets over Vileplume in that regard. Still an easy F tier in my opinion. Maractus, terrible mon, same as Cacturne, but I think it's just worse because it doesn't have the dual typing. We don't need to dwell on Maractus in all honesty. It's literally just worse Cacturne. Easy F tier. Also, we have Sawsbuck up next. Again, pretty terrible Pokemon. Actually, losing out on return was a pretty big deal for this Pokemon, because now it's relying on like fucking, I don't even know what Sawsbuck is relying on. I think it has like regular jump kick or something. No, it doesn't have that. It has like double edge. His facade doesn't have a lot for great stabs. Also, jump kick being cut. Oh, right, that because that was like better ground coverage. Now it's relying on Stomping Tantrum for grounds. Not ground coverage, coverage for steals, which Stomping Tantrum is still there, but Again, just a weaker option, though I guess more reliable to be fair. Chlorophyll and Serene Grace are kind of cool, but this doesn't really have any great way to take advantage of those, because I guess maybe if you want to run like regular Headbutt and Flinch, that's kind of cool on Serene Grace actually, and it has a cool speed. Maybe I'll put it above like Leafeon, because at least if nothing else, Serene Grace Headbutt plus a Sword attack could be kind of cool, and it does have the same with Horn Leech, which is better than Leafeon does. Amoonguss, easy A tier Pokemon in my opinion. I'm going to put it above Superior, actually. Amoonguss has some pretty good options for it. It's an amazing VGC Pokemon, albeit it's outclassed by stuff like Ferrothorn. And on top of that as well, I think that the utility of stuff like Spore is pretty immense. This is a great singles Pokemon as well. It's usually a pretty solid UMon in pretty much every format it's allowed in. The typing with Regenerator is also amazing. It's a great mixed bulk grass type. Easy A tier. Also, I've realized I forgot Tangrowth in this too. I'm going to have to Photoshop that in later. Tangrowth literally just slots in between these two, by the way. That will not change at the end of this tier list, but I just had to mention. Ferrothorn's up next. This is an easy top of A tier. I think it's more valuable than Shaven Sky personally. I will say, someone did mention that they thought that Ferrothorn should be S tier on our Steel type tier list. I don't entirely think it's a bad call. Again though, I personally think that Ferrothorn is just one of the best A tier Pokemon of any type that we're going to rank on this list. And I think it's a small enough line to where Heatran does just separate itself. I do get the logic though. I think I could see Ferrothorn being an S tier, and I don't entirely think it's a bad argument. I think that Ferrothorn just has enough competition from other Pokemon in doubles to where it's not getting up there because of its doubles usage, and it's just barely missing out on it for OU usage. It's a mon I could maybe see in later generations becoming an S tier grass. I don't think it's there right now is all. Again, feel free to disagree though. Virizion, this is definitely a D tier grass, just a worse version of Hisui Lilligan. Its speed is slightly better though, I will say, but it's so much less potent offensively, and typically you're really going to benefit from this being just a nice physical mon in my opinion, or a nice special mon I should say, because the benefit would be the fact that you're a fighting type that's special on top of also being able to threaten that you might be physical. But Focus Blast is so unreliable. D tier for sure. I'll put it right below Roselia actually. Quilladin, decent grass type. I'm gonna put it right above. No, I'm gonna put these actually both right above. In all honesty, I think they're never mind. I'll put them right below. Final answer. Quilladin's a decent spiker. Great a Violet mon. Cool with stuff like Synthesis, for example. It's just better Grotle in my opinion. Because one thing I will say is Quilladin having Bulletproof, I think is a little more valuable because it can keep itself a nice immunity to stuff like Sludge Bomb, which is pretty cool. Typically a nice grass type of coverage option that you would run to handle a mon like Quilladin. And it has some good moveset options in general, but again, just barely missing the ball. Decent F tier. Chestnut's up next. This is a decent C tier. This is a pretty cool mon actually. In some metagames, it's actually kind of an even soft viable OU mon in stuff like Belly Drum sets, but it's typically a mon you would see in like the RU realm, and for good reason. It's a great Phys-Def grass, it's a great spiker, great sustain as well, and as well, the fact that it's a physically offensive grass is pretty unique. There's some decent ones, but they typically fall in like the good for PU range. Chestnut's just an actually good viable physical offensive grass. One thing I will say though for Chestnut is I do wish that Chestnut had a slightly better speed stat to take a little bit more advantage of Belly Drum sets without needing Salac Berry. Otherwise though, if this had like base 80 speed, this would probably be a solid B tier grass. Go-Go is up next. Decent low tier grass in my opinion. I'm gonna put it right above, I'm gonna put it right below Torterra actually. One thing I will give Go-Go is the fact that this has a lot of really good, I'm actually gonna put it, might be a bit of a hot take. I'm going to put it right above Eggy. Go-Go has a lot of good sustain, some good support moves with stuff like, for example, you have Leech Seed for support, you have options like Toxic, you're a good Phys-Def grass too, you get Roar, so phase out other options. Your physical defense plus your Spidef, while they are a bit low, in tandem with the HP, they end up being pretty bulky. Go-Go has some great coverage for steals, whether you're Steel Flying, Steel Rock, really whatever the Steel type combination is for low tier, you have coverage for them with stuff like Wild Charge, Earthquake, Brick Break, Super Power as well. So this has decent coverage for its typical resistances. Go-Go's a solid defensive grass. Trevenant, solid defensive grass as well. This has nice grass ghost typing, which is honestly really valuable, especially with Poltergeist this generation, and also stuff like Harvest and Natural Cure. I'm actually going to put it below Eggy because it's literally just a worse version of Eggy as far as Triggermon goes. And sadly, this does miss out on options like Shadow Sneak, which I think could have actually helped a lot, but it still gets Sucker Punch for priority, so it's not bad. It's a grass type as well. It's a physical one that can't get burned with Natural Cure, which is also pretty valuable because you could just run a Choice Banded Poltergeist Woodhammer set and then switch out when you get burned. Easy D tier. Gourgeist, Also a solid D tier grass. I'm gonna actually put this right above Sceptile. Gourgeist does have a lot of different forms that are fairly viable. It's a really decent Trick Room grass, and it's also got a lot of options for stuff like Trick Scarf. It's good offensively speaking in some metas, but typically not really. It's really good typing as well. Again, similar to Trevenant, this is literally just defensive Trevenant, but I think it does favor grass slightly better, being a more defensive option. And also, again, the options that it can do, such as setting Trick Room, has nice leech support, screen support, Magic Coat, Destiny Bond, etc. I think they do help Gourgeist a lot with its roles. Hisui and Decidueye. This is a terrible grass type, I'll be honest. I can't actually in good faith take this thing highly. Decidueye, I know, again, I'm going to get a lot of shit for this, because I know in the fact that comments are going to say, this mon gets triple arrows, that's a 3-hit fighting type move that does a lot of stat drops. We have no certainty that's how it's going to work in this current meta, and I think it's literally just going to be a triple axle comparison in a best case scenario. If in a worst case scenario, it's just a 3-hit move that's 25 base power for each hit, and I don't think regardless it's going to be a great move, in all honesty. I don't think it's going to be good. Its next best physical fighting move is Rock Smash, which is pretty terrible. I don't think this will be a good mon. It's missing out on a lot of stuff it needs. I think this will be an easy F tier grass in all honesty, but I'll put it like right above Blossom. I think the Leafeon, again, it has its own niche that deserves its own tiering. Also, I think that Hisui and Decidueye is a bit too slow to even take advantage of its good typing, because unlike something like a Chestnut, it's not that bulky, and unlike something like a Virizion or a Breloom, well, unlike Breloom, it doesn't have good physical fighting priority, and unlike Virizion or Hisui and Lilligan, it doesn't have a good speed stat. It's just a worse version of all of them. Next up we have Decidueye. Decidueye is a solid C tier grass, actually. Decidueye has a lot going for it, actually. As far as a grass type goes, this is a decent physical and especially offensive one. Has moves like Poltergeist, Leaf Storm, etc., so it can make both sets work. Has dual setup with Nasty Plot and Swords Dance goes. It has good priority with Shadow Sneak and Sucker Punch, good recovery, great momentum, good support moves with Defog. Easy C tier grass in my opinion. We do have Lurantis up next. Lurantis is honestly a pretty decent defensive grass. Similar to Servine, this is a pretty good snowball, and I actually do think they're pretty comparable. I will say, though, that Lurantis not needing to run any sort of a Violate to be decent is slightly better than something like a Tangela or a Servine goes. I'm going to put it above the Sun Mons, actually, because if nothing else, I do think the fact that this is a pretty good Trick Room option, as well as a good option for stuff like Defog support. It's got good utility with Knockoff, and again, you can make yourself a lot bulkier with Superpower, which is something, again, Servine can't really do, because this move of choice with Contrary is Leaf Storm. So I'm going to give Lurantis the D tier for sure. I think it's a solid mon, it's definitely inferior to the top row. Shiinotic, I love this one so much, but Shiinotic is pretty terrible. Especially with Spotlight not being just like a follow me sort of clone. It's pretty bad in my personal opinion. Especially also, I think Spotlight got cut anyway, so even worse. This mon has no real good stats. It's kind of passive. It's just typing's not great for the fact that it's not an offensively based Pokemon or a fast utility mon, which I think is something that we've seen like Whimsicott do pretty well because it's kind of offensive and it's also a good fast mon. I don't think it works well in a slow mon in my personal opinion. I will say this is definitely one of the better F tiers, but it's still not great. I'm gonna put it above Practice at least. I think the typing, if nothing else, is kind of cool for low tier, and it has some good options, just not great coverage for steals, which kind of sucks. Serena, solid C tier grass actually, and I think there's a case for B. I'm gonna put it at the actually no, I'm gonna put it above Celebi in B, I'll be honest. This is a lot going for it. It's a great Scarf option this gen. Boots as well make this really reliable, and it's also a really good VGC mon, especially in the current Spike Month Cup. This is a great Riddle Room check. In my personal opinion, this is an amazing Rapid Spin option. It's a good Scarfer. It's a good offensive mon. Easy B tier mon, and especially with Queenly Majesty being immune to priority, this is huge for Scarf variants, or just speed boosting in general variants. Savali is up next. Savali, in my personal opinion, isn't really that great of a Pokemon. Savali, especially for the grass type, it's one of the worst ones, similar to Arceus Grass, where it has some niches, but it's ultimately not that useful. And I think the difference being is there's a lot more grass types that this is competing with in low tier settings. So I'm gonna put Savali Grass actually in the low end. I'll put it above the Hisui and Decidueye, because if nothing else, I think this does have some good coverage to benefit a grass type set, but it's still not a great Pokemon. Dhelmise, this is an easy C tier grass. I'm going to put it right next to Decidueye because I think if nothing else, Dhelmise does have some nice benefits of being a really good choice band option. It's a lot more defensive of a grass, but it can in theory do a lot of the similar physical offensive roles that Decidueye can. It's still not a terrible bandit option. It can still do Swords Dance, that's kind of well. but I think that ultimately you would typically more use this as a defensive spinner, which could be good on teams that are spike stacking rather than just going for removing hazards. So still a C tier grass in my opinion. Tapu Bulu. Tapu Bulu is definitely a solid B tier mon. I'm going to put this actually right above Hisui Lilligan. Tapu Bulu definitely does benefit a lot from just being a solid terrain mon, and while I know that Rillaboom is objectively just a better terrain setter, Tapu Bulu does still have formats where it is a kind of viable Pokemon. Depending on what's viable, this is a decent AV mon. I know I've actually seen people such as Moxie Boosted and VGC use this Pokemon pretty well with AV sets, or just in general really, well, I don't remember if it's AV or just a general bulky set, but the point is I know that Bulu can work in VGC, it's just a lot more niche. It's still a not terrible singles mon, but again, just a lot more niche. You can run this in Nat decks at the very least with some good success, because you can get options like Titanium and Rocky MZ in Nat decks, which do benefit Bulu a lot in Trick Room teams. So I'll give Bulu a B tier. I think it's still a pretty viable mon, just it's definitely nowhere where it used to be. Kartana, easy A tier. I think that I put it literally right below Ferrothorn on our Steel tier list, and I honestly, I think it's definitely, again, like just right below Ferrothorn as far as this tier list goes. Whether I put it there or not in the last one, I think it's where I'm standing on it right now. It's just right below Ferrothorn. Maybe, to be fair, I would have put it a little bit lower than that on the Steel because there's a lot better mons, but I think the gap is decent. The only thing I think you can make a case for is Skyman, personally. But I think if nothing else, what Kartana does offer, which I think is a lot better than Skyman, if anything else, is a better typing, and the typing is not as prone to inaccurate moves. Stuff like Seed Flare, for example, being 85% accurate, and Air Slash as well being like 90% accurate, definitely does hurt Shaman Sky a lot, in my personal opinion. Well, 95, but still. It hurts a lot for like just trying to spam a Scarf set. Even if you go for other high damage grass moves, it has stuff like Leaf Storm, but again, 90% accurate grass move, and you have to switch after. And also, its Seed Flare option, which is like its best option as far as spamming moves goes, Seed Flare only has like 8 PP. So I can't even really give that merit. And also, again, in tandem with that, it does miss. So I'm going to give Skyman literally right below Kartana. You could definitely make a case for these swapping. I think a Ferrothorn's just better than both, though. Thwacky's up next. Really solid, viable grass. I'm going to put it actually a pretty decent ranking. We'll put it right below Torterra. Grassy Surge plus Grassy Glide, as far as a low tier setting goes, is actually pretty viable in my personal opinion. This is a decent Violate mon. It's a good pivot. It's good offensively too. You can run Swords and sets that could be pretty monstrous as far as its tiering goes. I know it's not an actual tiered grass type, but I think it's better than a lot of the other not tiered ones that we put in D tier. Rillaboom, easy S tier. I'm going to put it right above Venusaur, and I'm actually going to put it right above... No, I'm going to put it right below Arceus, but I'm going to put the Gmax right above Arceus. One thing I will say is I think that Rillaboom is an amazing Gmax Pokemon, but unlike Venusaur, you're typically not running this to be a max. It's just a mon that can coincidentally be if you happen to not have a max on your team. And I think it's an important distinction to make. Venusaur is a good mon if you max it, and it's a good mon outside of max. Rillaboom is a great mon in general, but you'd really only max it if you don't have another reason to max a Pokemon in the game, in my personal opinion. Still a really good Pokemon, just they're both S tier. I just think that Rillaboom Gmax being able to check Kyogre a lot easier is definitely more reason to put it higher than Arceus, because it's also a lot more offensively potent, and the max moves are great on this Pokemon. Eldegoss, this is a decent low tier option. I'm gonna put it right above Thwacky. Being a nice rapid spinner with regen is pretty cool. It's got some cool options, but oh my god, its move pool, offensively speaking, is so lame. It's good support though, which is really all you kind of need in low tier, and it's a nice just budget version of Tang as far as a regen mon goes. So we'll give it that. Flapple, pretty terrible. I'll give it, if nothing else, above Shiftry. And I think the one thing I will give Flapple is the fact that Hustle is pretty cool on this. It's a nice Hustle mon in general for just breaking teams. I'm gonna give the Gmaxes literally just both bottom of C. Flapples will be right above, and it's just because of the fact that I think that Flapples having max evasion is pretty cool, and this clearing status for itself is pretty cool, and they're both kind of cool offensively speaking with their statuses, plus also the fact that you can run like a Hustle grass type and then start hitting all your moves outside of max, and hit them in max too, which is pretty cool. And specifically for Appleton's Gmax, it's the fact that you can clear status and you're really bulky, especially with Ripen or Thick Fat, you could take hits even easier. As far as Appleton's rating goes, I'm actually going to put Appleton right above Eldegoss. I think that Appleton's a pretty decent low tier mon. Well, actually,
No, I'm going to put it right below Eldegoss. Eldegoss being a spinner is pretty cool. But Appleton still has a lot going for it. Stuff like Gluttony or Thick Fat sets are both pretty cool. Ripen's even not terrible. It's got some nice priority to make up for its terrible speed. It's a decent defensive option as well as far as grasses go. And unlike Flapple, it's not frail as shit with that typing. So we'll give it D tier. Zarude is a solid B tier. This is going to be the highest tier B tier we have in my opinion. Zarude is a mon that, similarly to Bulu, it has higher tier viability. It's just more niche. But this also has viability in Ubers as an Ogre check. It's a decent Ogre check actually, as well as checking Groudon as soft checks to both, because you'll naturally outpace both their sets, and you could definitely EV this thing to take on Scarf Ogre too. It's a cool pivot. It's also kind of okay as Scarfer for stuff like Calyrex, again, if you're a Scarf set. This also has some good bulk up sets. It's nice, just Soul Breaker for lower tiers, decent B tier mon. And finally, regular Calyrex. It's just a bad Celebi. In fact, this is actually going to be better than Parasect, and I think really the one reason that I'm actually tiering this higher is because this has Trick, which is something it can do. But it's still a terrible mon, terrible typing. It's just Phione, but with 100 HP and a grass type. So with that said, this tier list went on way longer than I thought it would, I'll be honest, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it. On your screen now, you're going to see images with Tangrowth's rating and with Ferroseed's rating, because I did forget them, and I'm going to put the 2 Pokemon that are on the left and right side of each. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. If you did and you want to see more content like this, leave a like on the video and subscribe for more tier list content. And with that said, I will see you guys in Monday's video, since we take weekends off here. Until then, peace out, guys.